Charles Laughton made one film and never directed again because critics hated it. Today, that same movie is called one of the greatest of all time. Kubrick's war masterpiece was banned for almost 20 years. These 10 black and white films aren't timeless classics because they're old. They're classics because even now, in 2025, they hit harder than half the new movies in theaters. Charles Laughton's directorial debut tells the story of a fake preacher who stalks 2 children across rural America, hoping to get his hands on some stolen money hidden by their father. It's got one of the most chilling performances ever put to film, Robert Mitchum as Reverend Harry Powell. The way he slinks through this movie is unforgettable. At the time, critics didn't know what to make of it. Nobody was ready for a movie like this. The film flopped and Charles Laughton was crushed. He never directed again. But over time, people caught on. France ranked it the second greatest film ever made. Roger Ebert praised it for creating its own invented world and said it had outlived its era. Mitchum, who never cared much about this sort of thing, later said this was his favorite movie he'd ever done, and that Laughton was his favorite director. It took decades, but this film got the recognition it deserved, and watching it today, it holds up better than most films made now. The Third Man isn't just a mystery. It's a film made by people who actually lived through the war they were portraying. Carol Reed had done documentaries for the British Army, and Graham Greene, who wrote the screenplay, wasn't just writing about spies. He'd been one. Reed shot the whole thing with Orson Welles in the actual bombed-out streets of post-war Vienna. Rubble, craters, black market deals, the works. That's why the film still feels real, because it actually was. And it wasn't just critics or historians who admired it. Martin Scorsese became completely obsessed with this movie back in film school. Wrote a whole thesis on it. British Film Institute named it the greatest British film of all time. Kurosawa put it on his list of personal favorites. That should tell you everything. This one's never really disappeared, but it still deserves to be here, because not only does it hold up, it hits just as hard now as it did back in the 50s. On the Waterfront is Elia Kazan at his sharpest, tearing into union corruption with a kind of moral clarity you don't see much anymore. Marlon Brando plays Terry Malloy, a washed-up boxer who ends up in the middle of a fight that's way bigger than he ever asked for. Brando won his first Oscar for it, and it's still considered one of the greatest performances in American film. Kazan even said himself, "If there's a better performance by a man in the history of film in America, I don't know what it is." The story's not just about personal guilt or doing the right thing, it's about what happens when someone finally decides they're not going to stay quiet anymore. The themes are timeless. If you want to know when Kubrick really arrived as a major filmmaker, this is the one. Kirk Douglas plays a French officer trying to protect his men after they're ordered to carry out a suicidal attack during World War I. And when it fails, the generals, safe behind the lines, decide to make an example out of the soldiers. The whole thing turns into a courtroom farce where men are sentenced to death just to cover for military ego. It was banned in France for nearly 20 years because of its harsh portrait of the French army. Kirk Douglas later said, "There's a picture that will always be good years from now. I don't have to wait 50 years to know that. I know it now." He was right. Nothing about this movie has aged out, and the battle scenes are still convincing even after Saving Private Ryan and everything that came after it. Billy Wilder's masterpiece is a Hollywood story, but not the kind the industry likes to tell. A forgotten silent film star, a washed-up screenwriter, and a town that feeds on dreams until there's nothing left. Gloria Swanson plays Norma Desmond, and what makes the performance so haunting is that she wasn't trying to make a comeback in real life. She'd already moved on. She was working in radio and TV, didn't even want to come back to movies, but she agreed to do this one, and ended up creating one of the most iconic roles in film history. The film still holds up because nothing's really changed. The machinery of fame, the obsession with staying relevant, the way people get used up and tossed aside, it's all still there. You could drop this movie into any decade and the story wouldn't feel out of place. Even David Lynch called it one of the greatest. He once said that it's a truthful movie, and so it carries through to today. It has a lot of sadness in it. A legendary courtroom drama is heralded as one of the best movies ever made for good reason. The 12 Guys in a Room, One murder case, no action scenes, no music cues, no courtroom theatrics, just great dialogue. And somehow, it's still more gripping than half the thrillers made today. A teenage boy's on trial for killing his father. The jury steps in to deliberate, and over 90 minutes, everything unravels. Some of them double down, some start to change their minds, and slowly you get a full picture of each man in that room. This thing still hits because it doesn't feel like it belongs to any particular era. It just gets how people work, how fear, pride, and pressure mess with judgment. And Henry Fonda gives perhaps the best performance of his entire career. Akira Kurosawa is still considered one of the all-time greatest and most influential film directors to this day. And more than 60 years since the release of one of Kurosawa's most enduring cinematic masterpieces, Seven Samurai, filmmakers of today are still taking notes. The film essentially introduced the world to the commonplace assembling a team to defeat a common enemy trope. You can see echoes of it in everything from Star Wars to The Magnificent Seven to John Wick. Not to mention the film was revolutionary in its cinematography, editing, fight sequences and more, all of which still make it worth a watch today. This is where noir really kicked off. Dashiell Hammett wrote the book, John Huston directed the film, and Bogart turned it into a blueprint for every hard-boiled detective that came after. Dark alleys, femme fatales, everyone hiding something, nobody telling the truth. You've seen it copied a million times. Chinatown, Blade Runner, even Mulholland Drive. But none of those exist without the Maltese Falcon. The plot's tight, the characters are sharp, and the mood is just right. This one didn't invent the genre, but it nailed the tone so perfectly that everything else had to follow it. The Library of Congress even added it to the National Film Registry. You know Psycho. Even if you've never seen it, you've seen it. The shower scene alone is baked into pop culture at this point. But watching it today, it still works. The pacing, the structure, the way Hitchcock plays the audience, it's all razor sharp. Scorsese once said it's the kind of film where you think it's not scary anymore until you watch it again. And he's right. That tension is still there. The sound design, the editing, it's all been copied but rarely matched. 60 years later, and Psycho still gets under your skin. This one's heavy. The Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, poverty, displacement. It's not exactly Saturday night popcorn fare. But The Grapes of Wrath holds up because it never overplays anything. It just shows it. Just a family trying to survive, and a country that's barely holding itself together. Henry Fonda carries the whole movie. Quiet, angry, beaten down, but never broken. Every scene feels grounded. Clint Eastwood even said that when you revisit this one, you realize how much Ford managed to do on a small scale. John Ford's masterpiece was called the greatest American film for years, until Citizen Kane showed up. That says a lot.